Let me tell you something that most people will never have the courage to admit to themselves. The moment you stop performing for the crowd, the moment you genuinely, radically, unapologetically decide to focus on yourself is the moment your entire life begins to reorganize itself around something real. Not the version of you that was built to impress people. Not the identity you inherited from your environment, the real you, the one that's been buried underneath years of people-pleasing, distraction, and borrowed beliefs. And when that version of you finally steps forward, it shocks people. Not because you did anything dramatic, but because most people never see it. They've never witnessed someone who simply decided to stop shrinking. So before I go any further, I want to ask you something, and I genuinely want you to think about this and drop your answer in the comments below. When was the last time you made a major decision in your life based entirely on what you wanted, with zero concern for what anyone else would think? Be honest, because your answer to that question tells you everything about how much of your life you've actually been living for yourself. Now let's get into this. I spent a long time studying how human beings operate, and one of the most consistent patterns I've ever observed is this. The majority of people are living their lives as a reaction to other people. They wake up and immediately begin filtering their choices through an invisible audience. What will my family think? What will my coworkers say? Will this make me look successful, attractive, put together? They're not living, they're performing. And the tragedy of it is that the performance never ends, and the audience is never satisfied, and the performer, the real person underneath all of it, slowly suffocates. Here's the uncomfortable truth that nobody is going to say out loud at your dinner table. The people whose opinions you're afraid of are barely thinking about you at all. Research in social psychology has shown repeatedly that humans dramatically overestimate how much others are observing and judging them, a cognitive bias known as the spotlight effect. You are not the center of anyone else's universe. People are too consumed by their own internal noise, their own anxieties, their own performance to be giving you the sustained critical attention you imagine they are. The spotlight you feel burning on you, it's almost entirely a projection of your own self-consciousness. And yet, knowing this intellectually is not enough, because this isn't really about logic, it's about identity. It's about the fact that from a very early age, most of us were conditioned to optimize for external approval rather than internal truth. We were rewarded for compliance and punished for deviation. We were taught that fitting in was safety and standing out was danger. And those early lessons become wired into us so deeply that even when we're adults with full autonomy, we keep living as though the original rules still apply. We keep shrinking. We keep editing ourselves. We keep asking for permission that nobody is actually withholding. Focusing on yourself is the antidote to all of that. But I want to be precise about what that means, because focusing on yourself is not selfishness. It is not narcissism. It is not indifference to others. Focusing on yourself means committing to your own growth, your own clarity, your own values, your own vision, so that what you bring to the world is actually yours, not a borrowed identity, not a curated image. Yours. And the paradox which shocks people every time is that the more fully and authentically you develop yourself, the more genuinely useful and inspiring you become to everyone around you. You can't pour from an empty vessel, and you can't give something real to anyone if you've never let yourself become real. Think about every person you've ever deeply admired. I mean, the ones who made you feel something, not because they were trying to impress you, but because they clearly were not. The artist who creates work that breaks conventions because they followed their own inner compass. The entrepreneur who built something strange and specific and completely their own. The person in your life who walks into a room with a kind of settled energy that you can't quite name but can immediately feel. What they all have in common is that they stopped outsourcing their sense of self. They stopped waiting for external validation before allowing themselves to be who they are. They focused inward, did the work, and then without even trying, they became magnetic. That magnetism is not a personality trait you either have or you don't. It is the natural byproduct of self-development. And self-development is a choice you make and then make again every single day. Now, I want to talk about something that almost nobody discusses when it comes to this topic, and that's the discomfort phase. Because when you first start genuinely focusing on yourself, when you start saying no to things that don't align with your goals, when you start setting standards, when you start investing your time and energy into building the life you actually want people notice. And not all of them are going to applaud you for it. Some people, particularly the ones who've grown comfortable with the version of you that was easy to influence, are going to push back. They'll call you selfish. They'll say you've changed, as though change were an accusation. They'll feel threatened by your evolution, not because your evolution harms them, but because it implicitly challenges them. It holds up a mirror and asks the question they don't want to answer. Why haven't I done this? Don't let that stop you. The discomfort people feel in response to your growth is their discomfort to manage, not yours to prevent. You are not responsible for making your transformation comfortable for everyone in your orbit. What you are responsible for is continuing to show up, continuing to grow, and continuing to operate from your own deepest sense of purpose, not from guilt, not from fear of abandonment, not from the old reflex of making yourself smaller so others feel larger. There's a concept I return to often, and it's the idea of what I call the identity gap, the space between who you are right now and who you are capable of becoming. Most people are aware of this gap. They feel it. They sense that there is more in them than is currently being expressed. But instead of moving toward that potential, they stand at the edge of it and wait for circumstances to improve, wait for permission, wait for a sign that it's safe to proceed. The waiting becomes the default, and years pass, and the gap doesn't close, it widens. Focusing on yourself means choosing deliberately and repeatedly to step into that gap. It means doing the uncomfortable work of identifying your actual values, not the values you were told to have, but the ones you feel most alive when you're living by. It means auditing your habits and your environment with ruthless honesty. It means investing in your skills, your mind, your body, your relationships, not to perform improvement for an audience, but because you understand that the quality of your inner life determines the quality of everything else. The data supports this in concrete ways. People who demonstrate what psychologists call an internal locus of control, meaning they believe their outcomes are primarily shaped by their own choices and actions, rather than external forces, consistently show higher levels of achievement, resilience, and life satisfaction. They perform better under pressure, they recover faster from setbacks, they are less susceptible to learned helplessness. The simple act of taking ownership of your own life, of genuinely placing yourself at the center of your own story as the author rather than the character being written by others, has measurable, documented effects on every dimension of human flourishing. This is not motivational mythology. This is what the research shows. So when I say focus on yourself, I'm not speaking in abstract spiritual terms. I'm describing a practical, evidence-backed strategy for becoming someone whose life actually works, someone who achieves things, someone who builds things, someone who wakes up in the morning with a sense of direction that comes from the inside out. And yes, someone who, in doing all of this, tends to shock the people who knew them before. Not because they became arrogant or distant, but because the person they've become is so clearly, unmistakably, genuinely themselves, and that is rarer than people realize. Here's another dimension of this that I think deserves to be said plainly. Focusing on yourself requires you to confront your own excuses. And this is where most people stop. It's easy to say you want to grow. It's easy to agree with the philosophy. But when it comes to the actual daily discipline of choosing your own development over comfortable distraction, that's where the real test is. That's where you find out what you actually want versus what you like the idea of wanting. Every time you choose a Netflix series over a book that would genuinely expand your mind, you are making a choice. Every time you scroll through social media for an hour instead of working on the thing you say matters to you, you are making a choice. Every time you say yes to an obligation that drains you because you don't want to deal with the discomfort of saying no, you are making a choice. None of these individual choices is catastrophic in isolation. But they compound, they aggregate into a trajectory, and at some point the trajectory becomes your life. I'm not saying this to induce guilt, I'm saying it because the power in recognizing this is enormous. If every small choice compounds into a trajectory, that means you have access to trajectory-changing power in every single moment. The next decision you make can be different. Not perfect, just different. More aligned, more intentional, more truly yours. That is how transformation actually works. Not in dramatic overnight conversions, but in the patient, consistent accumulation of better choices made from a clearer sense of who you are and what you're building. And what happens when you maintain that consistency over time? What happens when you stay the course through the discomfort, through the doubt, through the moments when nobody is applauding and the results aren't yet visible? You become someone different, measurably different, noticeably different. The people in your life start to see it. Some of them are inspired by it, some of them are unsettled by it, but all of them notice, because there is something fundamentally arresting about a person who has chosen themselves, who has stopped leaking their energy into endless performance and redirected it into genuine becoming. That person has a gravity that's difficult to explain but impossible to ignore. You shock people not by trying to shock them, but by no longer needing their approval. You shock people by showing up again and again as someone who is quietly, consistently, relentlessly working on themselves. You shock people by having actual opinions rooted in actual values, by knowing what you want, by having standards, by moving towards something with a focus that most people never cultivate because they're too busy reacting to everything around them. Your quiet commitment to yourself becomes, paradoxically, one of the most powerful things other people have ever witnessed. I want to close with this. The world does not need more performers. It does not need more people who are excellent at appearing to have it together while quietly hollowing out on the inside. What the world needs, what your family needs, your community needs, the people you haven't even met yet need, is you fully developed, fully expressed, fully alive in the life that is actually yours. Not a compromise, not a performance. You. That begins the moment you make the decision to focus on yourself without apology, without waiting for permission, and without needing anyone to understand it before you start. Start anyway. Build anyway. Become anyway. The results will speak in a language that requires no explanation. And when they do, and I promise you they will, the shock on people's faces will be the sweetest possible confirmation that you made the right choice. Now drop a comment below. Tell me, what's the one area of your life where you've been waiting for permission to fully commit to yourself? I read every single one. Let's talk about it.